Hello and welcome to this final lecture on web crawling. So in this lecture what we are going to do is that we will write the final two functions. So one function is actually related to creating multiple threads, which is nothing but the create workers functions, which are actually going to create threads which are essentially going to be workers which are going to do the work, and by work I mean they are actually going to crawl up the web. So let's go ahead and define that function without wasting any time. So let me just go over here and let's just type in def let's say create workers, and in here what you need to do is that you actually need to use a for loop, and you actually need to repeat this set of process for the number of threads. So you type for and you type an underscore, so that underscore means you want no variable right over here. So you type for underscore in range, and the range is obviously going to be equal to the number of threads. So in parentheses just pass in the number of threads, and in here let's go ahead and create a thread. So to create a thread we type t equals, so this is a thread object, threading dot thread, and to this thread we basically pass in the target as the function which we want to execute. So as these workers are going to create work, or these workers are going to perform work, let's define the function name as work over here. So we have not yet created the work function, but we are soon going to do that. And then finally you type t dot daemon equals true, so this is going to be a daemon process. And finally, in order to start the thread you type t dot start, so that's actually going to start up your thread. So once this thing is done, you're pretty much good to go. Now the only thing which we need to define is that we need to define this work function, which is actually going to crawl the entire thing. So what we do is that we define the function as def work. This is absolutely not going to take any parameter, and you need to have a while loop over here. So you type while true, so this is always going to be true. So the first thing which we do is that we get the URL from the queue. So we type URL equals get, not get domain name, that should be get, equals queue, which is basically the queue in which we have the links right now. So we type queue dot get. So once we get those things, what we need to do is that we basically need to pass in this URL to the crawl page function. So we type in spider dot crawl page, and here you actually need to pass in the thread as the first parameter. So that is going to be threading dot current thread, so that's actually going to pass in the current thread, and you need to pass in its name, then give a comma, and finally you need to pass in the URL which this particular thread is going to crawl. So that's going to be URL over here. And then finally what you need to do is that you need to call in the task done method. So you type in queue dot task done, and this is actually going to terminate your thing. Okay, so once you have defined this work function, we are pretty much good to go. So now the only thing which you need to do is that you basically need to call in the create workers function to first create those threads, and then you need to call in the crawl function as well. So we are going to do that by exiting out of each of these functions. So make sure that you are not in these functions right here. And then the first thing which we do is that we basically type in create workers, so that's going to create the threads which are going to crawl one by one. Then we call in the crawl function as well. So once this thing is done, let's go ahead, save the code and try to run this thing. Okay, so this program didn't run because I already have this folder created. So make sure to delete this folder even before you run your code. So I'm going to delete this, and now what I'm going to do is that I'm simply going to save the code once again, and when I try to run this thing, as you could see, the crawling is now taking place, and it's actually crawled quite a bit of files. Okay, so it's actually crawled like 8 web pages. So we also have links to each of those web pages, and if you actually open up this folder, if you have a look at those crawled files, as you could see, we have a bunch of links over here. Now as this was a small website, we actually got very few links, but in case if you visit a big website, this is going to like continue forever because they are going to have like hundreds and thousands of links. So what you could do is that you could try visiting or crawling any website, but make sure that you have a permission to crawl those websites. And sometimes what happens is that some websites do not allow crawling. So if you crawl one website multiple number of times, so sometimes they might block you by your IP, so you might not be able to crawl that particular website. So keep that thing in mind and make sure that you only crawl the websites which you're permitted to crawl. So this was all about the web crawler, and I hope you guys understood this thing, because this was a bit complex thing which we have done in this course, but I tried to make the code as simple as possible. So actually I have a lot more complex what you could say web crawler code, but that's actually quite overwhelming and it would take like 50 lectures for me to explain you that. So what I thought is that this code would be quite easy to understand, so I purposely took this code instead of the big crawler code. So that's it for this lecture, and I hope you guys understood how we build this crawler. So what you could do is that you could even go ahead and tweak this crawler and kind of make it of your own kind. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.